Imagine stepping onto shores that look like movie sets from another planet. This video will take you to 12 islands, with landscapes so alien, they rewrite what you think islands can be. Expect towering trees that drip red sap, beaches that glow, lakes full of stingless jellyfish, and statues that stare from empty plains. And that's only the start. Stay for the final island. In a moment you'll see why it's the strangest of them all, and why travelers swear it changed how they view Earth. Curious? Good. Socotra looks like a Dr. Seuss illustration come to life. Strange, umbrella-shaped dragon blood trees drip red sap and cast eerie shadows across limestone plateaus. A microstory. A botanist I read about spent a week mapping trees, and left convinced they were survivors from a different epoch. But here's the catch. Socotra's flora evolved in isolation for millions of years, producing species found nowhere else. Want a travel image that actually looks unreal? In a moment you'll learn how remote access keeps Socotra pristine. Giant tortoises lumber like small tanks. Marine iguanas sunbathed on black volcanic rock. The Galapagos is Darwin's lab, but it's also cinematic. Picture snorkeling beside blue-footed boobies diving like tiny torpedoes. One diver I spoke to recalled a sea lion nudging her mask, curious and friendly. Why does it feel alien? Because species here lost fear of humans and evolved in volcanic isolation. Landscapes shift after eruptions, then life reclaims the ash. Stay tuned. One island near the end flips the script on what pristine means. Ever snorkeled through a lake of millions of jellyfish? Palau's Jellyfish Lake is exactly that. Golden, harmless jellyfish pulsing silently in turquoise water. It's surreal. You glide among the bells like a time traveler. Here's a pattern interrupt. No stings. How? The jellyfish evolved without predators and lost their sting. But here's the catch. The lake is fragile and closed to casual tourists at times. In a moment you'll see why conservation rules are strict, and how visiting can still be magical when done right. Moai statues stare across windswept plains with hollowed eyes. Easter Island is simultaneously archaeological mystery and lunar landscape. Imagine walking between rows of monoliths, each face carved centuries ago and set atop grassy slopes like ancient sentinels. A local guide once told me a micro-story about a night when a storm rolled in and the statues looked alive. Later, she laughed and said the feeling never fades. Curious how a tiny island hosts such massive sculpture parks? Stay for a later scene that explains how isolation creates cultural singularities. Komodo Island feels prehistoric. Thorny scrub, scorched earth, and the Komodo dragons, real-life dinosaurs, dominate the imagination. One ranger reported a dragon silently rounding a boulder and asserting its territory. The visitor described a chill, like meeting an apex predator from another age. The catch: dragons are powerful but shy. Responsible tours keep distance and protect both you and the animal. In a moment you'll discover the surprising underwater worlds around Komodo that make it doubly alien. Land and sea acting like different planets. Svalbard is an Arctic archipelago where snow stretches to the horizon, glaciers grind like slow machines, and polar bears wander ghost-like across frozen fjords. Visiting during polar night is like living inside a blue-tinted painting. Long shadows, aurora curtains, sound muffled by ice. A scientist once described hearing the glacier sing at dusk. A low, resonant crack that sounded unearthly. But here's the catch. Extreme conditions mean serious planning. This is not a casual beach trip. Stay tuned. One of our later islands also requires bold logistics, but rewards you tenfold. The Faroe Islands are a blend of turf-roofed houses clinging to cliffs and seas that roar like freight trains. Puffins punctuate steep walls. One ferry captain remembers steering through fog so thick, the islands seemed to appear from nowhere. Like a ship entering another world. The contrast of manicured green roofs against brutal North Atlantic weather creates an uncanny, cinematic quality. Pattern interrupts. Want a postcard that looks impossible? These villages are it. In a moment you'll hear how locals balance isolation with modern life. Reunion Island presents lava fields, jagged calderas, and the active Piton de la Fournaise, a volcano that reshapes the island every few years. Hikers compare parts of Réunion to walking on the moon. Black basalt, sharp ridges, and surreal color contrasts. A trekker I met photographed rivers of old lava glass and said the silence there made voices feel small. Curious about safety? Here's the catch. Eruptions are frequent but monitored. Experienced guides turn danger into spectacle. Stay for travel tips later on visiting active volcanic islands responsibly. Madagascar is enormous and alien in its biodiversity. Baobab trees stand like upended roots against a pastel sunset, while lemurs chatter in the understory. One photographer's microstory. The moment a ring-tailed lemur posed mid-leap against a baobab avenue, she knew no picture could capture the island's strangeness fully. How did such odd life evolve? Isolation. Madagascar split from Africa millions of years ago and became a laboratory for evolution. In a moment you'll learn which tiny behaviors make its animals feel positively extraterrestrial. Aldabra Atoll feels prehistoric and perfectly preserved. Raised coral islands, turquoise lagoons, and forests of mangroves sheltering giant Aldabra tortoises that lumber like ancient tanks. A naturalist once spent a week tracking tortoise trails and found shells worn and sun-etched like antique armor. But here's the catch. Aldabra is strictly protected. Only limited permits allow visitors, which is why it feels frozen in time. Stay for a later scene where I reveal the single island whose protection model could be a blueprint for all fragile paradises. Tristan da Cunha is the world's most remote inhabited island, a volcanic spike surrounded by months of ocean. Residents live in a single village. Weather can cut you off for weeks. A sailor once described arriving by tiny ship and seeing smoke from one chimenea. A human fingerprint in vast emptiness. That isolation crafts a community with traditions unlike anywhere else. Curious how people thrive so far from supply chains? In a moment, you'll hear a microstory about bartering baked goods across generations. Batu Hiva in the Marquesas is dramatic. Verdant cliffs plunge into jade waters, and villages perch on impossible ledges. A traveler I read about wrote that the first glimpse from the sea made her gasp. The island looked hand-painted and untouched. Why the otherworldly feel? The Marquesas were never heavily colonized, and their valleys keep secrets. Ancient petroglyphs, abandoned terraces, and orchids that bloom at odd angles. Stay for a surprise. Later, we'll reveal which island on this list is most likely to inspire lifelong artists. Isolation is the secret ingredient. Islands cut off from continents become evolutionary petri dishes, cultural time capsules, and geological laboratories. Quick question. Why does isolation create both bizarre species and unique human cultures? Because limited gene pools, unique climates, and human ingenuity all push life down strange paths. Think dancing cormorants or stone statues where no one else carves. Here's the open loop. In a moment you'll see how conservation status determines whether an island looks alien or becomes a touristized caricature.